At Lockheed Martin, we're on a mission. Your mission. Not just the next mission, but the one that's 2 steps ahead. The one that depends on solving problems before they happen. Our mission is to prepare you for the future by engineering advanced capabilities today so that you can protect what matters most. That's why we've not only taken the lead in hypersonics, but we're helping you integrate that technology faster than ever. It's why we're not only developing the laser weapon systems you'll need, but deploying them in the field. It's why we've coded cyber readiness into everything we do. It's why we created Orion, the only spacecraft that can take humans to the moon, Mars, and beyond. Why the next generation fighter is ready to help you protect the generations to come. And why we've already built autonomous technology and artificial intelligence that advance human ability. The multi-domain battle space of the future is already here, and there's no time to waste. No time to play catch-up. New age threats require new age capabilities, and that's why, at Lockheed Martin, our mission is to build the integrated solutions you can depend on. Because the world is depending on you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Maria DeMerito, Vice President and General Manager, Lockheed Martin Space Special Programs.
Thank you. Our mission to lead intelligence integration and forge an intelligence community that delivers the most insightful intelligence possible. This is the mission statement of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence: to lead, to forge, to deliver. Seamless collaboration and innovation across the 18 elements of the U.S. intelligence community. Across the intelligence disciplines: human intelligence, signal intelligence, imagery intelligence, and across domains: air, space, land, sea, and cyber. Leveraging that collaboration to deliver the most decisive intelligence advantage to our national leaders and to our warfighters. Leading this incredibly important work is today's opening keynote speaker, the Honorable Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence. Moderating the discussion with Director Haines is INSS's Board Chair, Tish Long. It gives me such great pride to be here on this stage and have the privilege of introducing these 2 incredible women, true visionary leaders of the intelligence community. As a leader running a major business at Lockheed Martin, my focus is on protecting the men and women of the intelligence community and providing them and all the information that they need to protect against our adversaries. Our team builds satellites and leverages artificial intelligence and data analytics that I know help Director Haines and her team of leaders, analysts, and operators across the intelligence community support making tough policy decisions and supporting challenging warfighting situations. Director Haines ensures that the silent professionals of the intelligence community are given the best this nation can give them to accomplish their vital missions. At the same time, Director Haines challenges all of us, those in the intelligence community and those of us in the private sector serving the intelligence community, to look to the threats of the future and to bring forward the best ideas and the best innovations that we can to keep America's intelligence edge over our adversaries for years to come. It's a particular privilege to be here to introduce 2 leaders who over many years have set the vision for excellence and performance that we all follow. To introduce a D&I who wakes up every morning and goes to bed every night with one thing foremost on her mind: what can I do to make sure that this country is protected? Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tish Long, INSS's Board Chair, and our keynote speaker, the Director of National Intelligence, the Honorable Avril Haines.
Maria, thank you so much. It's good to see you again. And again, it's good to see everyone here in person.
Is now joining.
And it's great to see Avril virtually. So one question I didn't ask, Avril, can you see me?
I can now, and I just want to tell you, well, thank you so much to Maria for that remarkable introduction, and I know how spectacular her work is. And Tish, it is really a privilege to be able to do this with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I'm relieved that the technology is working. We did not get a chance to rehearse this because Avril was going to be joining us in person, and as you can imagine, her schedule changes not just daily, I'm sure hourly, sometimes by the minute. So I'm glad we were able to make this work to have you join us virtually. And knowing that something could change at any minute, like the president could call, let's just jump right into this, Avril. So you've been in the job for almost 8 months now. So, and you've been in the intelligence community before. The title of this plenary session is State of the Community. So how about giving us your view of the state of the intelligence community?
It's a great question. I mean, first of all, it's actually wonderful to be back in the intelligence community. And that's maybe part of the continuing state of the intelligence community. You know the community well, Trish, and I think one of the most remarkable things about it are the people that exist in it, and just the relentless focus that everybody has on mission, and those things have not changed. And what I'm finding as I come back in, and particularly from this particular perch at ODNI, is that my focus is really, and I think you'll hear this a lot from me during the course of our conversation, but is very much on the sort of bones of the intelligence community, the workforce, the institutions, how we can make them better and how we can help them evolve to meet the future that we all know is changing rapidly before us. And I think that's really the state of the community in many respects. It is that we are in an inflection moment. We're in a changing time. We're at a point in our history, I think, where we are shifting our resources, our allocation, our focus, and what we want to do is create a community that's really as adaptable as it needs to be and able to focus on the next challenge as it presents itself for us.
Okay, you gave me a couple things there to jump off from. So a top priority being the people. I mean, it is all about the people. We all know that. So what are you thinking about as far as attracting and retaining talent? I mean, we have been and I think will continue to be in a war for talent. So how do you compete with the private sector? How do you get the good ones in and how do you keep them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's obviously top of mind. I mean, I think the thing that we have is mission, and there's just no question that when I talk to folks who come into the intelligence community, that is the driving factor, I'd say, for why it is that they're willing to come and want to come to the government and to the intelligence community in particular. I mean, I think it is, in my view, and obviously I'm biased, but parochially, I think there just is no better mission than what you have in the intelligence community. There's no greater opportunity to contribute to the national security of the United States and the country and to make the world a better place as a consequence. And that is really, from my perspective, the thing that we lean on. But what we're trying to do, and maybe just to lay out my priorities, if that's all right, to sort of give you a sense of how we've been thinking about things and how this fits into a broader picture, kind of maybe comes back to your question of how we recruit. A big part of the ODNI's work is obviously the budget and thinking through our allocation of resources across a really extraordinarily broad community. And in that context, I've worked with the component leads across, as you well know now, 17 components, a lot of components besides the ODNI, and worked with the heads of each of these components to sort of say, what are our priorities for the intelligence community as a whole as we're going into this next budget for FY22? And it was really interesting to see how much consensus there really was across the community. We all prioritize China, and we all recognize that as being, in a sense, a pacing challenge that we're focused on, an unparalleled priority, as I've said in my testimony, relation to this. And that is, I think there's truly bipartisan, nonpartisan support for that focus. But everything else beyond that was focused on what I continue to call kind of the bones of the intelligence community. It was a talented and diverse workforce, number one, right? Number two was really about investing in new and emerging science and technology, where we know it can give us a competitive edge in today's future. The third was really focused on, actually, it's sort of fascinating as we think through these priorities, but developing emerging expertise in long-term destabilizing trends that need to be integrated into our daily work. So when I talk about that, I really am thinking about, for example, climate, things like public health, digital expertise, economic expertise, a variety of key expertise that we know has to be integrated into our daily work, so that it's not just about the long-term threat that you're focused on, but also how that affects the day-to-day operations that we're dealing. Third one, or fourth one, I guess I've gotten down to, is partnerships, stronger and more effective, deeper partnerships. And that's with the private sector, an area that you're well familiar with and have worked on, and that's obviously something that we've been working on for a long time, but it's also with other countries, allies, partners that we work with. It's also with local and state and tribal entities, and it's also with academia and even nonprofits that are international in ways. We have to build out our partnerships in so many different spaces, and I know we'll talk about that further on. And then a final one is really about resilience, and here it's resilience that is that allows us to be more resilient in crisis and in conflict. Cyber is obviously a big piece of that picture, but it's also about supply chain work and all of the other things that we're thinking through from an economic security perspective as well, for the intelligence community to support the policy community and thinking about that writ large, but also for the intelligence community itself.
Okay, I think you just hit on about every single one of the questions that I have teed up myself, and I imagine what the audience wants to hear about as well. So, let's start with partnerships, and let's start with the public-private partnerships. The audience here is probably about 70% industry, 30% government. How can industry help? They want to know, where should they be focusing their internal R&D? What are some of your biggest challenges? How can industry help?
It is such a huge question, and I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts on this, as well as, frankly, so many folks in the audience, because I know there's a lot of experts here. But let me set it up by saying, here are some of the ways in which I think industry can help, and then I'll get to topic areas that I think are particularly important, where we need to sort of get better, in a sense, in the context of our work. I think one aspect of industry is that it's really critical to bringing in the technology and expertise that we need in the U.S. government for our mission in the intelligence community, but also more broadly, right? So in that context, and I'll just try to embed a few topic areas as we're going along to give you examples of what I'm thinking about. But for example, biotechnology is an area of incredible importance to us, and we need to understand it better, and we also need to be able to take advantage of the innovation that occurs in this area. For example, it's an area where we don't have as much expertise as we need, and a lot of that expertise is resident in the private sector, in companies that are working on biotechnology. And that's a place where, we could actually not only serve to learn from those companies about the innovation that they're engaged in and how we should be rethinking how we apply biotechnology in our spaces, but also get some of the expertise, share expertise, have opportunities for essentially folks to come in and our folks to go out and learn from each other in longer term settings. But that's just one example that I picked largely because it's not often the one that's first, noted. People talk about AI, which is obviously also critically important. They talk about quantum computing. They talk about a whole series of areas that we know are traditionally thought of, but that's just another one, is biotechnology, that I'm focused on among a range of topic areas. But another place that I think about this in the context of partnerships is really just how much of our critical infrastructure, for example, is in the private sector. And we all know that. We talk about, depending on the sectors, 85, 90%, within the private sector. It's true that just across a range of areas, the fact is so much of our national security is carried out or is critically sort of held by the private sector. And as a consequence, we're not going to be effective at protecting the nation unless we're protecting pieces of the private sector, in a sense, unless we're working with them to help them protect themselves, unless we're promoting resilience throughout that critical infrastructure, but also in areas where we know that we're partnering with them to do remarkable work that's critical to our national security and our work. And that relates to some of the supply chain issues that I know INSS has been focused on, that we all are concerned about. But it's also about understanding, frankly, where those vulnerabilities exist, constantly discussing and talking to each other how we can get better at helping each other in these spaces, and recognizing that this is really a shared responsibility that we've got. And I think that's a place where the private sector can really help us enormously as well. And then a third thing I just say is it's the private sector in and of itself is an increasingly powerful actor in global geopolitical work, in effect. And, we did these global trends reports that I know you know well. Every 4 years, we sort of look out over the future, 15 years or so, and say, what do we think are the big trends that are affecting the world? And often we talk about non-state actors and their implications and their impact, and the fact that they can both be spoilers of government action, but they can also be critical to the momentum that actually drives government action. And in many cases, we are talking about huge multinational corporations, private sector work that happens on a transnational basis that we recognize is in fact extremely powerful and is part of the conversation, and is a geopolitical actor in and of itself in many respects. And both understanding that, but also recognizing that they are part of our geopolitics and that they have a responsibility as well in helping us to, promote the vision of the world that we all want to see, and our values, our democracy, all of those things that are critical to us.
So I think that last point is really important, and I suspect there are any number of folks in the audience thinking, so how do I go about that? How should our company, get involved? So I just ask you to think about that, and maybe that's something for a follow-on conversation. The other part about partnerships, of course, are our international partners and our allies. And I certainly know, but I think folks would like to hear from you, the state of our partnerships and how are they helping, but really just across the board, how are you finding as you've started your international travels, how are our partners doing? And how are they feeling about the United States?
It's great. First of all, I would say that our partnerships are strong. I would say too, though, that that many intelligence communities around the world, I think, are going through similar reflections. They are focused on their institutional strength. They're thinking about resilience. They're talking about the importance of science and technology in their work. They're recognizing the importance of talent and diversity and inclusiveness in their work. It's really remarkable how similar some of our challenges and the opportunities that we perceive are. And I would also say that in terms of the relationship with the United States, I think they are, will be no surprise to people in the room where you are, given how many folks I know in the private sector work with their own partners in these areas, that they look at the United States, they want to know, are we going to be able, when we commit to something, to stick with it? Are we, in fact, going to be sort of pushed back and forth? How consistent will we be? All of those sorts of things. And we talk to them about our relationships in intelligence and national security. And frankly, in those areas, I think we really have been able to maintain partnerships in a way that is consistent and that demonstrates the value of those partnerships, and that allows us to have conversations that are quite frank and and in our mutual interest.
And I think that's what it comes down to, the shared mutual interests. And it oftentimes, as you know, the intelligence relationship is while it's in the background, it can be the strongest part of the relationship. So let's shift gears a little bit, Avril. Afghanistan. Afghanistan and terrorism, to be specific. We just marked, of course, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and we recently withdrew the last US troops from Afghanistan. So when you think about, and not only the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Iraq, Somalia, how has that affected our ability to collect? How do we get good insights if we don't have troops on the ground and intelligence collectors on the ground to really get that, what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to, we'll start with Afghanistan, but, Tish, I'd love to know where you were on 9/11 too, if you're willing to share that. I was thinking about this. It's just it's such an iconic moment. And I would say, I cannot believe it's been 20 years since that moment, because it seems so fresh in my own mind, those moments. But yeah, I think, look, Afghanistan has been gut-wrenching and deeply personal to the intelligence community. I think so many of us have spent time there, have worked with the folks on the ground, have been part of that. And we, in classic style, I think, responded, getting to work, trying to do everything we can during these last few months, and particularly this last month in August, obviously getting people out safely, tracking threat streams as we do, doing the analysis that you'd expect us to be doing to support our policymakers so that they can make decisions on really challenging issues over this period. And in the context of counterterrorism, I mean, as you point out, and I've stated publicly, Bill has as well, there's just no question that obviously as you pull out, without troops on the ground, without the infrastructure we had, without, the Afghan government in the position that it was, our intelligence collection is diminished. And that is something that we have to prepare for, and that we have been preparing for frankly, quite some time. And for counterterrorism in particular, we have to look across a global, landscape, in a sense, of terrorist actors that we have to manage and that we are responsible for being vigilant about. And in that context, really between, when we look at terrorism more broadly, what we see from an international terrorist perspective is that the threat has diminished over time. It has gotten less, really as a consequence of enormous effort from the intelligence community, from the Department of Defense, from others across our US government, the State Department as well, in really degrading that, the capacity of international terrorist organizations to conduct attacks. And in terms of the homeland, the threat right now from terrorist groups is really not, we don't prioritize at the top of the list Afghanistan. What we look at is Yemen and Somalia, Syria and Iraq for ISIS. And that's where we see the greatest threat. And we maintain, our efforts to ensure that in every way possible, we can manage that threat and that we work to counter it. And in Afghanistan, we will want to monitor any possible reconstitution of terrorist organizations, and that's obviously a big focus for us. But we, develop in our sort of classic way indicators so that we can understand what are the things that we would be likely to see in the event that there were reconstitution. How can we ensure that we have sufficient collection to monitor against those indicators so that we can provide warning to the policy community, to the operators, so that they're able to take action in the event that we do see that, and that we can work against it. But it does not reduce the threat of those who are inspired by the ideology. And I think that is one of the greatest issues that we continue to monitor, which is the potential for, homegrown violent extremism, in a sense, in the United States or otherwise, where people are inspired by the ideology, so to speak, and have lone wolf actors and so on, small cells, groups and whatnot. And that's something that we also monitor and counter, so that we can really try to reduce the hatred and vitriol, frankly, that terrorism is based on, and tragic consequences that it has for our society.
So expanding on that a little bit, FBI Director Wray has said that domestic violent extremism is one of the greatest threats facing the United States. And you just really referred to that, but what is the intelligence community's role in understanding and countering domestic terrorism and domestic extremism?
Yeah, so we use two different terms. We've got homeland violent extremism, which is typically those are inspired by international terrorist organization ideologies that are propagated, and then domestic violent extremism, which is a kind of frankly, a potpourri of different ideological instigators in that context. They're both obviously in the homeland and are a sort of a domestic violent extremism threat that we're focused on. And as Director Ray indicated, it is a growing and a concerning threat, and one that we have been very focused on. For the intelligence community, our support is really in the context of support to the FBI and to the Department of Homeland Security, which really take the lead in addressing those threats. And we help to provide them with information that may, for example, give them an understanding of interactions with international groups and organizations and so on. We also, part of the Director of National Intelligence's remit, and including the National Counterterrorism Center, is in trying to bring together, in effect, domestic terrorism with international terrorism to provide a comprehensive picture and a strategy to counter terrorism for the United States. It's one of the essentially the outgrowths of 9/11, in fact, and the IRTPA, or the Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act. And in the context of NCTC's statute, it specifically authorizes NCTC to actually bring exclusively domestic terrorism intelligence essentially together with international intelligence related to terrorism in order to create that strategy. And it's, so I think we do play an important role, but it's obviously has its limitations.
Okay. If I can remind the audience, I do have this nifty little iPad, so please send in your questions. I have plenty to keep us going, even beyond the 45 minutes, but love to get some questions from the audience at the same time. So you also referred to, one of your #1 missions is, of course, working the budget for the intelligence community. And you also referred to some strategic shifts. So again, tying back to the last question, after 20 years of fighting terrorism, the U.S. is shifting. We are shifting really to focus more on strategic threats posed by China, Russia, global instability. So how is that going? How are you shifting budgets to the extent you can talk about it here in an unclassified forum? How is that changing the focus of the agencies, as well as how should it be changing the focus of industry to support the intelligence community?
Yeah, it's, this is not my analogy. I wish I could take credit for it, but I have often thought about the government as just an enormous ship, that you're sort of just trying to adjust the trajectory of it just a little bit, a few degrees. But in fact, over time, that adjustment in trajectory can make an enormous difference. And so in many ways, it is slow, but it is happening. And I see it, even between when I was last in government and coming in today, just how much more our activity focuses around, in a sense, near peer competition, and that being China at the top of the list, but Russia, right, dealing with our adversaries in a variety of ways, like North Korea and Iran and so on. And it is, it's a very interesting, intellectually, frankly, shift, because it's, there are tools that we've learned through the process of countering terrorism that we can apply in this context, and there are ways sort of working, or integration of intelligence, or sharing information, all kinds of things that can continue to be relevant and work just with different subject areas in a sense, and pushing in that way. But there's also parts of this shift that are really just almost like a paradigm shift in how you're thinking about things. If you are focused on a challenge of collection. I'm trying to think, how do we say this in an unclassified way? But it's just, if you're dealing with non-state actors like terrorist groups, they are going to have certain skills and capabilities, and so your method of approaching them is going to be quite different than the sort of longer term competitive effort that you're making against a broad adversary or or just another state that is pursuing its own interests, so that you can provide an understanding that allows policy makers to really make better decisions. And one of the areas that I really think relates to this in a sense is our emphasis on science. And I'll just give you an example of what I mean by that. I think I was thinking, like, how do you explain to people why it is so important to invest in science from an intelligence community perspective? And my perspective on this is as follows. Like, I think science fundamentally helps you better understand the world, right? It is not that you are revealing, universal truth or something like that, but it really provides you with better, basically methodologically, right, sound, verifiable interpretations. It is a way of understanding things and doing so in a verifiable way, right? Like, you take a method that allows you to reveal, in effect, what is happening. And it allows you to question basic assumptions that you've been making and sort of position you for better reflections on, and insights that you might not otherwise have seen, right? Like, you just better understand the world. And in this moment, as we're shifting, in the landscape of challenges and opportunities that we're currently dealing with, I think knowledge is increasingly a resource for community, right? It's an increasingly important, critical resource for society. It's critical to our democracy, but it's critical also to innovation across a range of things, right? Like, as you enhance your knowledge, you enhance your capacity for innovation. And I think that is critical to making us more competitive. And in fact, science is what helps us develop that knowledge base more effectively across a range of issues. And so in many respects, that is fundamental to how we're shifting our approach in some respects from, as you point out, kind of a more CT-centric space to a more of a near peer competition kind of landscape. And while at the same time maintaining vigilant watch over the CT issues, which continue to be something that we have to track, that we have to be on top of every day. So it's managing those short-term threats while we're also thinking through the long-term landscape and interest for the United States is sort of a critical piece of what we're trying to do institutionally in order to allow us to do both at the same time. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, Tish. I'm sure you've been doing this for so long. Yeah.
No, Avril, it makes complete sense. And of course, extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, to be all-seeing, all-knowing, everywhere, all the time. But you said something about information, and I'd like to ask you something about disinformation, because I think the intelligence community has a big role to play here. As you talked about science and getting at the truth, how are you working as a community across government with our allies to really counter the huge amount of disinformation that is purposefully being put out there by our adversaries? What are you doing in this arena? And I'd just really like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so Congress actually passed a law that told us that we have to set up a foreign malign influence center. And I think this was a big piece of what they were focused on in that context. And it is intended to include, for example, election security issues as well, but it's really much broader, to your point, and relates to a variety of different types of disinformation and kind of information manipulation and so on. And so from an intelligence community perspective, that is something that we are now looking to establish as we, get funding for it and so on, to push forward on this issue. And I think it's critical. And it's not as if we've been standing still on these issues. I mean, the components across the intelligence community have already and are doing some pretty tremendous work in trying to understand, basically what is out there, how to prioritize it, think about it, what are some of the methods in which you might be able to counter it, and really help the policy community start to think through what is the policy strategy for managing this and what are the operators going to do in this area. But it's critically important, and it's also something that you have to prioritize in the sense that it is, you can't go after all disinformation everywhere. Like, you have to figure out what is the most important and how do we actually manage that, and how do we help, I believe, in educating our public so that they're able to manage disinformation and misinformation as it comes in a way that's consistent with our values and our belief in a democratic system, because it is one of the most, I think, challenging things, in a democratic system where you believe in free speech, where you want to give people, everyone, a voice and give them the ability to exercise that voice. But at the same time, you want to make sure that they are as educated as possible in being able to disentangle what is not true from what is true, and to, at least bring to the table, what is it, the great Moynihan, quote, something like, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but not everybody's entitled to their own facts, right? And so at least be able to have a conversation that allows you to come to the table with the same facts, but nevertheless then be able to focus in on what it is that you do have real disagreements over.
Well, we'll be watching on that one. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm glad our technology is working. My iPad is not. I apologize to the audience that if I'm not asking your question, that's why. If Larry is around, nothing is downloading.
Understood.
But as I said, I've got tons of questions. Supply chain. So this is one, another one where the president actually made some direction. It just keeps saying it's not downloading from the server. Oh my, there's a lot of questions. Sorry. Let me get the supply chain, and you can be thinking about that one as I look for the others. I think there's jamming going on up here on the stage. Nothing was downloading. So supply chain of real.
I swear it's not us.
Yeah. No, I know. You only work outside the U.S., not here. And you mentioned supply chain. So talk a little bit more about that. The vulnerabilities, how you're assessing them, how the intelligence community is involved, how you're working, again, foreign partners, law enforcement, and how can industry help?
Yeah, I'll try to make it a quick question so that we can, or answer rather, so we can get to your others. But overall, it's obviously a whole of government effort. I mean, this is, the intelligence community supports a whole series of other actors within the U.S. government that are working on these issues, and beyond the U.S. government as well, obviously. I know that industry is focused on these questions as well. And I'd say that, just to tease it apart, to sort of maybe provide a couple of thoughts that may be of interest to you, but also that might give you a jumping off point to focus with us on, is that I think you have to start from the beginning of the process thinking about how do you decide what it is that you need to protect, because it is not possible to protect every good or service that is out there and the supply chain that exists. And so one of the really interesting things to me has been, being a part of that conversation of how do you actually design a process that lifts up and prioritizes those aspects, those goods, for example, that are most critical, for which we need to invest our, enormous national security efforts into protecting. And then as you go through that process, you realize there are a whole series of questions that are related not just to sort of scenarios in which, so it can be anything from a crisis that's a natural disaster to, to a man-made or an intended conflict or other things that threaten your supply chain, right? Or interference or leverage that another country may be using in order to actually make it more challenging for you to react to other things that are unrelated. All of those things can be true, for scenarios in which you are concerned about it. But you also then need to think through, so what are the vulnerabilities? Is this more vulnerable as opposed to another good that may be less vulnerable? Are the vulnerabilities associated with for example, certain countries having the capacity to exercise leverage, or are they more distributed? Do you have partners and allies who can help you be more resilient? Is there a way to think through sort of a whole variety of resilience mechanisms that then might mitigate, for example, and help you to reprioritize again those goods and services that are most important for you in terms of spending your resources and time trying to protect. And then going through the process of, obviously, once you've identified, okay, these are key things that for which we need to focus in on, how do we address insider threat questions? How do we address, issues related to just simple supply questions? Should they become a challenge either sort of in normal circumstances or in a conflict or in a crisis? And how do we actually, consider alternatives for resilience when we need to or when we can under those circumstances? It's a truly fascinating sort of set of issues, frankly, and I think it's going to be something that we're continuing to work on. And while there are some things that are just obvious to everybody, whether it's in the context of the pandemic or microelectronics or, key aspects of technology that we've all focused on, I think this is just a continuing conversation where we're going to be wanting to make sure that we're focused on the right supply chains as we're moving forward.
And do you have the technical skill sets within the intelligence community to really do everything that you just outlined, which, truly is everything that needs to be done? Do you have what you need?
Yeah, no. We don't yet. I mean, I think, and as we identify new things too, we're going to find that we're going to need new skill sets that we haven't even contemplated at this stage. I mean, I think it's, when you go from such a broad range of looking at health pharmaceuticals or, masks or other things like that, right? Like on one side of supply chains, to the types of science and technology spaces that we've been focused on as well, you just realize just how broad that expertise is that you need in order to both understand the chain itself and also to develop alternatives and resilience options and address the insider threat issues that you really can't understand unless you get deep into how it is that these things are manufactured and ultimately supplied.
Exactly. So that's an area for our audience. You've mentioned resilience a couple of times. Pardon me. And one aspect, certainly, of resilience is our on-orbit assets. So Space Force is really changing how we address challenges in space. Can you talk about Space Force and the NRO, how that relationship is going? How are they working together on the challenges in space, and maybe even just more generally, DoD and the IC?
Absolutely. No, and I love talking about NRO. They're absolutely amazing. And as is NGA, as is NSA, like all of these, but NRO obviously, has not been out in the public for all that long, just a few decades now. And really they supply, in effect, the capability that we have within the intelligence community in these areas generally. And while we can't go into a lot of detail about what they do and what they produce, I will say that there are a lot of people at INSS who know this already, including Maria and others there's so many people who work on these issues and who recognize just how important our, frankly, private-public partnerships are and how much that helps us to maintain resilience in these areas. And I would say that, looking into the future, we are looking, in effect, to ensure that we defend what is an incredibly important aspect of our architecture, as a country. In other words, space has enormous opportunities for us and has lived up both from a science perspective, from a trade perspective, commercial perspective, so many different ways we've seen enormous investments in space contributing to our prosperity and to, what we can do as a nation more broadly in incalculable ways. And as a consequence, we want to make sure that we both have as much understanding of it, as much opportunity to protect those assets. And and to work with, Space Force and others to do so through a varied, USG organizational effort. It is, it's broad and it's important, and I think that's probably as much as I could say, Tish, that would be unclassified and useful. Sorry, it's not a very easy one to talk about.
It is a tough one, but you did a great job. Our time is coming to a close. I said I could fill in for more than the 45 minutes. Let me give you an opportunity just to close out. And if you can weave into it, I started with, it's been 8 months since you've been on the job. What surprised you, or what did you not anticipate?
Oh, that's a great question.
And any final closing thoughts you'd like to add?
I'd say, look, as a, I think my favorite part in many respects, which I didn't assume coming into the job and was really thrilled to experience, is just the remarkable leadership that I'm blessed with as colleagues throughout the intelligence community. I just, totally honest, I cannot imagine a better group of people right now. And it's astonishing just the degree to which everybody frankly gets along and recognizes what's important. And I have had so much fun learning about different parts of the community by virtue of being in this job and getting out to the different components. And I mean, Tish, for example, the organization that you ran, NGA, is just astonishing, and getting to learn more about what they do. And that's been true across really every component. It's been exceptional. And I've really enjoyed that piece of things. But I would also just say, as closing remarks, INSS it's an association that I've known for years, obviously, having been in government for ages, but also having interacted as a consequence of being in the intelligence community and national security for over the years. And it is an association that I think really tries to live up to the best example of how we can, in effect, improve public-private partnerships, because it's an association that is, in my experience, consistently focused on trying to make our national security more effective, and finding ways to bring the private sector and the public sector together on those issues is critical. And I find that as we work with partners across society, it's not just in the private sector, but it is also in the private sector. I find there are just so many citizens, in a sense, that just believe in the national security of the United States. They take action based on what they think is right for us as a country, and they do so sometimes to their detriment, their personal sacrifice in some respects. And I think that kind of camaraderie is fundamental, but it's also having an opportunity to have those kinds of deep conversations. And I recognize this is, just keynote for further conversations that you're going to have that are going to be so much more detailed and in depth on so many different issues. Those conversations are critical to us growing. And one of the things I love about the intelligence community is we're a learning institution. We know we never get it perfect. We are always looking to improve. And it's part of what makes it fun, honestly, is, getting better and finding new ways to do things in more effective ways, while still having a real mission at the end of the day that makes you feel as if you're contributing to something of value. So really appreciate it, and really appreciate your service, Josh. I mean, you are, first woman who is the head of a major intelligence component, and it was fundamental for so many of us to see you do that and do it with the grace that you do everything. So really appreciate being with you today. Thank you.
Well, Avril, thank you. Thank you for those kind words about INSA. We certainly do strive to provide the platform, and thank you for your kind words about me. We are all thrilled for you to be the first female Director of National Intelligence. And ladies and gentlemen, I could not think of a better person to kick off our conference. our summit, our symposium. So Avril, thank you so much. I think for those who didn't know you before, you probably just added a lot more fans to your fan base. I very much appreciate, and I think everyone here very much appreciates your candor and your insights. It actually is hard to believe it's only been 8 months on the job. You have such a command of things that are going on. And I know sometimes it probably feels like it's already been 8 years, but I personally am delighted that you said yes and that you are in the chair that you are in. So thank you so much for joining us. Next year in person, hopefully, and good luck with the rest of your day. Thank you.
That sounds great. You too.
A big round of applause.
Bye-bye. Thank you.